All right, bit of a false start there, but here we go. So we're going to be talking about thinking techniques because I think if you're speedrunning chess, it's a lot more valuable to know how you should think about a position for the first time as opposed to learning a bunch of specific positions or specific positional traits or specific strategies. It's good to be able to derive them yourself from scratch. So focusing on the thinking techniques is really good. And in the next couple of sessions, which will be our last three, at least for this plot arc that we've planned ahead of time, this one is going to be about evaluation, so how you understand a position that you've never seen before. The next one will be candidate moves, and then in the last, we're going to see some strategic elements that have to do with pawn structures. So there are three main evaluation elements that you need to pay attention to. Some people in some books, they write about several different things that all go together into a very complicated model of how you see the position. For example, you'll often hear people cite this guy, Jeremy Silman, who wrote a bunch of books. His model has something like 7 or 8 components. So balancing 7 or 8 things to think about while you're in the middle of a chess game, especially if you're new, it's super cumbersome. So we're going to do just 3 things. And they're 3 pretty broad things. The first one that we're going to be looking at is king safety. Then we're going to talk about piece activity, and then we're going to talk about material. And the order of these 3 things is significant because this is the order of importance, generally speaking. Usually king safety is way more important than piece activity, which is way more important than material. Usually when people are first starting out, their intuition will guide them to the wrong conclusion that material is very important, or like pawn structure is very important. They'll just pick something like this is super important, and they'll just neglect their king safety entirely. Based on our last lessons about attacking chess, it makes a lot of sense that king safety should come first, because in the attacking chess principles, we can kind of just throw everything out the window if we have a winning attack. We don't care about material anymore. We don't care about our strategic soundness of the position. None of that matters if you're attacking them. So makes a lot of sense. Anyway, I like these 3 because if you understand them pretty well, it will guide you with pretty high accuracy in almost any position. I can't even think of an example where it doesn't really make sense to think like this. That's not like a stupid position. It might, if you have a position that's like mate in 1 or something, you would probably just notice that along the way, even if you were thinking in this more like rigid, structured way. Right. You'd be like, piece activity. Oh, I can checkmate them. That's pretty active. Then you play that move. So the degenerate cases, not that interesting. So we can basically consider it like an approach that never fails, which is nice. Now, we need to consider all 3 together all the time, but I've picked this position and 2 games to illustrate situations where one is way more important than the other 2. Because I think that helps you to understand what that one element means. In practice, it's going to be very complicated sometimes. Otherwise, chess would be easy. Okay, so starting with this really important one, king safety. We're going to have to already blend all 3 together. I think you already understand what it means, though, for king safety, right, from the attacking lesson. If you had to put it in your own words, like how do you know if a king is pretty safe? Or how do you know if the king is unsafe?
So first, I think he would have to have like some pieces nearby, which are also covering the squares that are near him, so that they can make captures if necessary.
Yeah.
And in the event of a situation like smothered or back rank mate, then it would be nice for him to have an escape.
Right.
In case that part fails.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that's really important? Here, let me give you a hint. Let's pretend in this position that we're thinking about black's king, and we want to know if their king is safe. But we're going to take that pawn on g7 and put it on h6.
Mm-hmm.
So they have a space. They maybe have some pieces nearby to defend their king. But did this change of moving the pawn from g7 to h6 make their king safety better or worse?
Seems worse.
How come?
Then there's not as much control over the square nearest. So the h7 square can be Like you can just stack up more pieces on that square,
That
and
makes sense,
it's a
yeah.
vulnerability.
I'm more worried about the dark squares, but yeah, usually when you end up with some doubled pawns or any kind of bad pawn structure near the king, it can manifest as a weakness on one color or both colors. So yeah, you're on the right track. If you have a bad pawn structure, even if you have enough pieces nearby and you have some space for your king, that can still be a recipe for disaster. So these are three really major things for the king safety. Okay, so briefly touching on piece activity and material. What do you think it means for a piece to be active? I just want to know, how do you perceive it already? Because I think that's important. You might not be
So
wrong.
depending, yeah, so depending on the piece, I guess just having a lot of available spaces it can go to. So if a rook is controlling an open file, it's happy. If a knight is sort of in the center, then it's also happy.
Hmm.
And if a bishop is, I don't know, in the back or at the side, then it can just eat up a whole diagonal.
Yeah, I'd say that bishops are happy when the position's not blocked, because
Hmm.
they're usually pretty good wherever they are. That's one of
Yeah.
the nice things about going to the endgame when you have bishops. But
Mhm.
if there's a bunch of pawns fixed on their color, then they're sad. So yeah, that
Mhm.
makes sense. And the queen, it's just like rook and bishop situation. The king is happy in the center when it's not getting checkmated. So yeah, we could generally say that there are situations where the pieces are happy and they're
Mhm.
specific for each piece. And you could think about it in a more abstract way too, like if a piece has lots of places to go, or if it controls one square that we care a lot about, then that piece is
Mhm.
happy. So that combination or the weighted average of those two things will tell you if your
Yeah.
piece is happy or not.
But
Okay.
then I've also like read something about overloaded pieces. So if they're doing too many jobs, then they're also not happy.
Yeah, that's true. Um, but that could also be a symptom of your other pieces not doing enough work.
Okay.
So I wouldn't necessarily blame that overworked queen or something, right? Like, oh, you're not an active piece because you're overworked. It's more like, why aren't any of the other pieces sharing this labor?
Yeah.
At least that's how I see it. You could say it's a semantic issue, but anyway.
Okay.
Um, I think it informs your decision making better to think of like my other pieces are being lazy.
Hmm. Makes
Okay.
sense.
Now, material I think is pretty obvious by now, but in our first session, you didn't know the value of the pieces yet, right? So do you feel like you have
Mm,
that all down like pretty well at this?
I think so, yeah.
All right, cool. So the pieces have their traditional values,
Hmm.
and we should also consider the imbalance of the material. Sometimes you're going to have the right amount of points, right? You might have more points when you add up all of your pieces, or you might have the same number of points, but you have a different piece composition. So now that we're getting to a more advanced stage, I think of material not just as like how much, but also what's different between my side and their side. So if I have a bishop and you have a knight, that's a material imbalance, even though it might just be like a 0 point difference.
Hmm.
So those things all kind of come together and tell us who's doing better in the position. And that's why we do evaluation. We want to figure out who's doing better. And even if we can't figure out who's better for sure, we can use that to pick what moves we're going to examine. So in this situation, whose king is safer? Let's just give it the rundown.
Gonna go with white.
How come?
There's a happy little rook on f1, and there's also a queen, a bishop, and a knight all happily protecting that area.
How about the pawn structure?
Pawn structure looks good since it's a castled king.
Yes. Do you think that black is in a good position to disrupt or sabotage that nice coordination?
Potentially, since they still have a queen and a white square bishop available. So,
If you had a couple moves in a row as black, how would you use that to mess up the king? Like, just forget about what white's doing. Like, what would your next couple of moves be?
ooh,
Within reason. Not like, I'm going to take a piece, and I'm going to take a piece, and then I'm going to take a piece. Like, things where,
yeah.
like, if they don't do anything serious, I'm going to just keep going.
Mhm. Um, I guess I would just start by trying to mess up that pawn triangle So I would probably go b6 takes c5.
Okay. Maybe I'll just take back, with my b pawn.
Sure. And then from there I could probably take the rook and eat it onto b2.
On b2?
Maybe?
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's say I skip my turn.
Uh,
This is a good way to think sometimes, by the way, where you're like, if I do something where their move is obvious, I'll play it, and if I don't know what they're gonna do, I'll just skip it. It gives
okay,
you like
then,
an upper bound for how reasonable your plan is.
yeah. Oh, actually, I want the black bishop to come out, so maybe I'll move the pawn on a6.
So you've played now what, 3 moves,
Mm-hmm.
but you still haven't started anything on the king side, right?
Right.
So if your opponent is giving no resistance, and it takes you more than 3 moves to even get started, it shows you that it's not really feasible.
Right.
So here, bc5 and rook b2 and a5 maybe are all reasonable sounding moves.
Mm-hmm.
I think rook b2 runs into bishop c1, but that's
Yeah.
it's not like an unreasonable move to consider, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they're definitely not having anything to do with the king safety. So this is a good test to show you that the king is really, really safe for white. Even if black gets to do whatever they want, there's no way they can really pose a threat to you at the moment. And how about black's king safety? Whatever we do for our side when we're evaluating, we have to do it for their side too.
Yeah. Okay. So is my task now to just attack the king and see what happens?
Well, let's try to evaluate it qualitatively first, and then we'll figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
Like, is their king really good? You mentioned earlier, like, the pawn structure is like a castled pawn structure for white. It's the same
Yeah.
exact thing for black. Is there any difference?
The rook isn't. Well, the pawn structure is more or less fine near the king.
It's identical to white's, and white's was fine, so yeah, that makes sense.
But I feel like there's a bit of extra weakness just because the bishop hasn't moved at all, and well, I guess the rook is fine where it is, but the rooks aren't connected, so that's
That's more of an
I guess.
activity thing than a king safety thing.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
let's just focus on the king safety first.
Mhm.
We'll get to the material and piece activity, though.
Mhm. So right now I see that h7 is vulnerable to some attack.
And the reason for that is probably that their pieces are not nearby, right?
Yeah.
And this is also coupled with the fact that if white gets a couple moves in a row, they do have a reasonable plan,
Mhm.
right? So yeah, h7 would be the target. So that's good.
Yeah.
Now let's pause on like figuring out what to do about that and focus on the material and the piece activity just to get a full picture of this position as an exercise. So that's the king safety. How about the piece activity? Who has more active pieces here, white or black?
Mm. Black has a really, really active queen, but I don't know about the other pieces. They don't seem like they've moved very much.
What do you think black wants to do with their queen?
Um, Potentially just yeet it around and eat up the pieces little by little.
But how?
But-
Like, let's say you get to play a couple moves in a row again.
Yeah. Um,
It's hard to find a move with that queen, right?
yeah.
So
There's too much in the way.
yeah, the queen looks good, but it's not really that good.
Mhm.
And the other black pieces?
Okay, well, one of the bishops probably hasn't moved at all, and then
Mhm.
the rook has moved once, the one that's on b8, and the other one just happened to move maybe once or twice after castling.
Sometimes a piece can be active even if it didn't move. Let's actually rewind one move just so I can show you what I mean. So their last move was rook b8, which is probably not the best move.
Yeah.
It's a pretty logical move because you want to avoid bishop takes c6 hitting your rook. But maybe the rook is also already good there, where if you can, for instance, play a5 and then take here, or even just, like trade something, then maybe the rook is going to activate on the a file. That's purely hypothetical, but just to show you that it doesn't have to move to become active. So when I'm thinking about the activity of the piece, I'm kind of concerned with, is it doing something? Does it have potential for the future? Not just like, did it move from its starting square? Yeah. So when it's standing there on b8, I'm not that sure that it's good.
No, it doesn't seem that different from a8.
Yeah, it's pretty similar. They probably want to take here and then play something like rook b2, but as I already hinted earlier, when they finally get there, these guys are lined up on dark, so you'll run into bishop c1. So it actually doesn't have that great of a future anyway.
Okay.
This is the game Aronian versus Carlson. This happened in like Norway a few years ago, I think. I just grabbed this from like my list of examples that I'd saved for later. And Carlson's actually in a lot of trouble here because his pieces are really not that impressive. He hasn't finished development. Yeah. His rooks have moved, but they're not doing anything special. Like the rook on d8, it's actually on a good square because it exerts pressure down the whole d file, but the d pawn is really safe because there's no other real activity against that d pawn. The knight on d7, like, you could maybe move it to f6 or f8, but that's it. It would probably be better if it reached the square d5. But when it gets there, you can play e4. Like, just move your bishop out of the way and play e4 and kick that knight away. So even then, it doesn't have a great future. And if you play a few moves in a row, you still can't get that bishop anywhere because all the pawns are on light squares, which is what we were talking about earlier with the activity. So lots of problems. What's the material balance here?
So I count 7 pawns on black side, and then also 7 on white side. And black's missing 1 each of the bishop and knight, while white is missing just a knight. So and a rook.
Yes.
So
there's a term that we've used a little bit. I'm not sure if you remember. So what's it called when someone has lost a rook for a knight or a bishop? There's a word for it. Okay. So it's called being up in exchange if you have the extra rook for the minor piece. And if you lost it, it's called being down in exchange.
Okay, I thought that just meant like having any material disadvantage just for a one-piece trade.
Yeah, I thought things like that too before I learned like chess coaching, you know. Actually, when I first learned how to be a chess coach, I didn't know that pin and skewer were like actual words that people use. I thought it was just people being descriptive, like, oh, you know, it's pinned in that spot. I'm like, yeah, you're right, it is kind of pinned there. Like, apparently it's like actually terminology that people have used for hundreds of years. So, yeah, the exchange terminology, I don't know when it started. It's probably in the last 100 years, though. It's a thing in old books. They used to write like a capital E. Exchange. It makes it sound really grand. But sometimes people give up an exchange on purpose. And this comes back to why we have these 3 factors, right? You can actually exchange an advantage in one factor for an advantage in the other factor. And ultimately, you want it to kind of cascade up. So you would rather sacrifice material to disrupt their king's safety so you can launch a winning attack. Or you build up your piece activity at the price of material to get to that winning attack, something like that. Generally, if you give up your king safety for material or piece activity, it needs to be really substantial because you're going the other way from this hierarchy. So here, white is down in exchange, but they have advantages in every other way, which is why I chose this position. So we know that the problem with black's position is that their king's not safe. The problem for white is that they're down material, but their pieces are very active. So we should think about launching a winning attack in a position like this. So what's the first move that comes to your mind for something like that?
For white?
Yeah.
Knight g5.
Okay, knight g5 is definitely forcing. What do you think black would do?
Probably kick with either g6 or h6.
Well, g6 doesn't kick anything, but it would defend h7. Yeah. Right, so maybe let's focus on h6 because it's more forcing. I like to look at the forcing replies first. Yeah. Does white have anything good, or should they just retreat?
I think they're fine here.
Okay.
So you could probably add pressure with queen c2.
Okay. Let's say they take the knight then. That's the big challenge.
Oh, yeah, no, I was thinking of g6.
Oh, yeah, I meant h6,
So,
sorry.
Yeah. No, you definitely said h6, but I didn't
You're like
look at it.
G6.
No. Then, yeah, then I guess I would just go for the check and go bishop h7.
After pawn h6? Okay. Now, let's say I have two options, right? I could play king h8. Let's start with that one.
Okay.
How do we proceed from there? Now we're leveraging all the visualization ability that we've built up in the last couple weeks. Couple moves in here.
Oh man. Okay, so then at that point maybe I would support the bishop with queen c2.
But again, your knight's hanging, right?
Yeah. So then they'll just take that.
Yeah, you would need to get something more special for it. One move that I might consider is knight takes f7 because it's check, right?
Yeah.
And they could take
But
the
then-
bishop,
Yeah.
but then what would you play after that?
Oh, okay. Yeah. Then queen c2.
Queen c2 check. Okay, let's say I play king g8. Look, one more
Yeah.
move.
King g8. So I'm already like I've got my knight on
f7.
f7. They've taken the bishop,
Mm-hmm.
so that no longer exists.
Right.
There's a pawn that's chilling on h6 still.
Yeah. And your knight is hanging because my last move was king g8, attacking your knight.
Then I'd probably want to retreat, but on the way I'll probably take their knight.
Wait, how do you take their knight?
Wouldn't I be in?
Knight's on f7.
Oh no, I'm yeah, okay. So maybe then I would take the rook.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in this variation, you're kind of recouping your lost material. But I wouldn't be that satisfied with this variation. Do you know why?
The knight's just kind of trapped in that position, doesn't know where to go at this point.
Let's suppose I can get it out successfully. Let's just pretend, you know, maybe I'm going to take on c6, maybe I'm going to take on e6, maybe I can rescue it with my other pieces. Let's just pretend. I still wouldn't be that happy. Because I'm winning material at the expense of my piece activity. And it's not really a lot. Like, I was down an exchange, and I won an exchange. So this is a very complicated line where things could go wrong, and the reward is pretty little. I would rather make further investments to go on and attack on the king or something, right? So let's think along those lines. Knight g5 isn't bad, but they can defend. They could even play g6. We didn't even bother analyzing that, because in this sort of optimistic line, it still doesn't even look that great. So let's try something more forcing. What's the most forcing move here for white?
Bishop takes h7.
Okay, let's say I take it. What's your next forcing move?
Queen c2.
You could play queen c2, but then they have g6 and they have f5 as possible defending moves. Look for another option.
So then I'll go knight g5 now.
Okay, let's pretend I go back to g8 because I don't want to be out in the open.
Then I guess it's queen c2, and then they have to defend against mate in 1.
There's a stronger... Well, it's actually not mate in 1, but it's a big threat. But there's a stronger way to do the same thing.
Okay.
If you play queen c2, you're only threatening queen h7. You have another move that threatens queen h7 plus something else. Multi-purpose moves are usually very good.
Okay, so then since... Was he on g8 again, or
Went back to
h8?
g8, yeah.
Okay.
If they were on h8, you'd be right that it's a mate in 1 threat. But I think king g8's better.
Okay, so I'm just kind of looking around the board now for answers.
Okay. Let me draw a couple arrows maybe to help out.
Sure.
So we're take, right? So the king's out there.
Hmm.
We
Yeah.
activated our knight with knight g5. And just
Yeah.
for simplicity, we're supposing they go back to g8 to try to understand
Hmm.
if this is like a viable idea. Now, you said queen c2, which attacks
Hmm.
h7. Is there any other way the queen could attack h7?
Ah, yeah. So queen can go up to h5.
Okay, so why do you think this might be better? What else is it attacking?
Also f7.
Right. So now we're getting access to all the weaknesses.
Hmm.
But let's calculate a little bit more, because we did sacrifice a piece, right?
Yep.
It's pretty dangerous to sack a piece. I mean, it looks like we're probably going to get like 2 pawns or something, which is nice. We could at least force a draw in that case. But let's pretend that they have to defend. What do you think Black would choose to avoid getting checkmated or losing material? Do they have any good moves?
Maybe knight f6.
Okay, let's say knight f6.
Hmm.
What would your move be then?
Never mind, it doesn't do anything.
Why not? Knight f6 looks
Because,
good.
is it? Okay.
So it attacks your queen on h5,
Yeah.
and it defends h7. So I think that move makes sense. But it sounds like you see a problem with it.
The queen can still take f7, right?
Yeah, that's right. So once you see this, and they have to play king h8, how do you feel about this line? Is this promising? Or is it like not good enough for a bishop?
I mean, the king is very well unsafe, so I guess a couple more moves could result in checkmate, but I don't know if I have enough pieces in that area to make it happen.
Right. So what you're working with here is a queen and a knight against just the king and a knight.
Hmm.
So you probably don't have enough to win the game. You might remember we had this like 3-to-1 ratio. We only have 2-to-1 at the moment.
Hmm.
But they do have serious weaknesses. So
Hmm.
I'll show you what happened in the game, and then we can move on to a new example. This is the main thing. So in the game, they played bishop takes h7.
Hmm.
And this is interesting, because he also could just win a pawn, right? He could have played like this. Just a free pawn, simple stuff. But they're already down in exchange, so they would be playing for compensation, not really to get an advantage. So it makes sense to consider this move if it works. If this move doesn't work, we'd probably play bishop c6 just to get what we can for the rook. Okay, so they have to take it. Knight g5 happened. If they played king g6, their king would be very unsafe. The problem in a variation like this is a move like queen g4. And you're going to have to do some gymnastics to not lose the game as black, because they're threatening some serious moves here. But without getting too into the weeds, they played king g8, queen h5, and knight f6, the move that you suggested. And here it's queen takes f7. And this is actually a part where you would ideally see a little bit further, because you still are basically down a rook, right? You sacked a bishop, you were already down in exchange. That's a total of like 1 rook. And your compensation is a couple pawns. But you can see that black's pieces are still just as inactive or passive, you might say, as they were in the first place. So the further material investment hasn't enabled them to make their position better. So as long as you can keep making some forcing moves like in our attacking lessons, you should be fine. So what do you think is an active move here for white?
Trying to think of the most attacking thing possible.
Yeah, good. That makes sense.
And I saw queen h5, but that just gets my queen taken by the knight.
Right, so the knight is an active piece now. They technically have improved their knight,
Right.
but it's
So
still
then
not that great.
Would e4 be okay? Because
Pawn
then that
e4?
maybe opens the
That's an
the
interesting idea.
the diagonal for the bishop.
I think you could do better, because the queen already has the ability to do whatever that bishop is going to do, right?
Okay.
And you don't have to wait to do it. That extra move, e4, could be something that black really needs. So it's better not to give it to them if you can afford it. So what else? You're thinking on the right path. Like, what move would you play with that bishop if you could play 2 moves in a row? Like e4 and then...
I think I would actually just keep it in the same diagonal because I mean I only have 1 move, so.
Okay, if that's true, then you probably don't want to play e4 because it's like you're already happy with the bishop there. But I was gonna say you could play bishop f4, attacking the rook.
Right.
So is there a way that you could do that differently? It's like more forcing.
Oh, I guess I can put queen on c7.
Okay.
So that I'm double attacking the rooks.
Okay. There's actually a third threat. So this is a really, really strong move, and that's what they played in the game. What do you think the third threat is after threatening to take the rooks with the queen?
Wait, so threat for which side?
For white. White. This move is multi-purpose, so there's actually another
Yeah.
purpose besides these 2 things.
Yeah.
Let me give you a variation just to illustrate. So if you play queen c7, they could play bishop d7 or bishop b7, and then the rooks are connected and protecting each other.
Sure.
But there is still a way that white can win substantial material because of the other reason that queen c7 was good.
Yeah, so I have a pawn on c5, which is pretty advanced, so I can just take the one on b6.
There's no need to rush, though. That pawn is like, it's going to be strong for the rest of the game. We're going to talk about that in 2 weeks.
Sure.
So let's look for something more forcing still. Like, we could take that pawn, but no need to rush.
Okay. Alright, so there's also a knight fork on f7.
Right. So this is actually why queen c7 had multiple ideas. It attacks both of these rooks, and it clears f7 for the knight. So that's your square clearance tactic.
Okay.
Yeah. So this is really nice. And once you see this move queen c7, you can feel very confident to play bishop takes h7 in a real game because you're going to get all of your material back and you stay active. So it's a very clear attack, very nice sequence. And this is the main thing I wanted to show from this game. The rest of the game is really interesting too, but I'd like to show some examples for the other things too. Okay. Do you have any questions about this before we move on to the next example?
Not right now, but
okay. Yeah, you could always ask me later. And I've put a lot of notes here for you to read later on. Okay. So here is a game that I played, and we're going to use this as an example for piece activity. This game I played against, they were never my student, but they were like a student for someone else, I guess, that I was aware of when I was living in New Jersey. And they were always tryharding in the open section. And that's how I ended up playing them. For some reason, this kid and his brother, they were always, I think they were choosing to play in the open section. I don't think their parents even made them, but they just get destroyed like every tournament. It was pretty sad to see. And I'd sometimes talk to them like, you could play under 1700 or something. It would still be really great. And yeah, I felt that they were getting depressed over time. And I still showed no mercy. It was like, go to your section, please.
As you should.
Yeah. It's not really great when really low people join the higher sections, and that's not like a chess elitism thing. It's just because of how the rating equations work and because of how you get norms. This wasn't a norm tournament, so it didn't matter, but I've played some tournaments where I could have gotten a norm for the highest titles. You need to get like 3 or 5 norms to get a title, right?
Right.
But if you play someone who's low, it destroys your norm chances. So I'd play someone who's like 1,000 and crush them, and then my norm chances are gone for the rest of the tournament. It's like, why did I even bother? So that's just a downside for being low rated and playing the high section. It kind of punishes your opponents, no matter who they are.
Right.
It also messes up tie breaks if a GM plays a lower player. So like at the end of the tournament, it's like all the GMs have 5.5 out of 6, and they have to figure out who's the winner. And it's like, well, your tie breaks are bad because you played someone rated 1,000. They're like, can I please play someone who's 2,200 and beat them instead for better tie breaks? Yeah, that's how it goes. So this is the game. I was playing white, and my opponent played this very... At the time, people were saying, like, this is a drawish opening, nya, nya, nya. But people have been doing more interesting stuff against it recently. For instance, like, one of the top lines that people play now is this one where they kick the knight back, they play knight takes e4, and then white is playing knight c3. With the idea of deliberately messing up their pawn structure in order to get better piece activity, because now their bishop can come out rapidly.
Right.
So this is what people are doing these days. But back then, people who played this as black were mostly playing for a draw. I think that's a fair statement. This game was in like 2018, I think. So he took on d4, and I played e5, active move. He played knight d5. I played queen takes d4, another active move. And he played c6, guarding the knight. Now, in this position, the difference in activity between white and black is pretty small. But you'll see that it grows in this game. If you had to quantify somehow the difference, you'd say black has one piece out in a valuable way. The knight on d5 is pretty well placed. But white has two. And their pawn is already on e5. And it's their move. So even though it's a small difference, it's something that can quickly grow as long as you continue to play actively. So I played bishop d3, pretty normal move, and my opponent played queen b6. Sort of a weird move, right? Like I'm expecting them to rapidly castle their king, try to attack in the center, and then they play like c6 and queen b6. So I was wondering, like, just what's going on here at this point. And I think I had recently played in a tournament game where I was playing someone low rated and I didn't know because I showed up late. I used to sometimes play at the Marshall Chess Club in New York. And for this recent game, around the time that I played this one, I showed up to the game. I didn't check their rating or anything because I was like, I just want to play chess. I don't care. They quickly forced a draw, and then I went and saw their rating, and they were like 1,000 points under me. I was like, oh man, I should have thought that maybe they want to force a draw. So that was fresh in my mind. So when I saw queen b6, I was like, maybe his suspicious behavior has something to do with our rating difference. Maybe he wants to force a draw to try to like steal a couple rating points from me. So if you know that your opponent really wants to trade pieces with you, but you want to play actively, what do you think you should do? In this specific position, you could also just tell me, like, what's white's best move?
So I would ignore them and continue attacking.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because if you are measuring your piece activity by like the difference in our pieces being on useful squares, then you should continue to put yours on useful squares. So what is the best place for us to put our piece right now?
So I'm guessing you want to decline that queen trade, say not today, and then I guess since they moved the queen out of the way, then your queen is perfectly fine on h4.
Okay, so let's pretend you play queen h4. You're on the right track, by the way, that you might not want to trade queens immediately. You might make them work for it. That's a way that you could think about it. If you play queen h4, though, I think it does give them an active thing to do. It justifies it a little bit.
True, yeah.
So what would they play to take advantage of queen h4?
Bishop c5?
Bishop c5, I don't know if it takes advantage, because it's threatening bishop takes f2, right? But your queen is guarding h2 from h4. So it's not like a strong threat. I think it's more like just putting pressure, like developing in a normal way.
Yeah.
If I wanted to take advantage of the queen, I'd probably play bishop e7, attacking the queen. It's trying to make you move again. But I think even this is fine for white. So maybe I'll just put this here for future reference. Like you could either play, I don't know, maybe just play queen g3, attacking the g7 pawn. They would probably castle to protect it. But then you can play a move like this, threatening mate again.
Oh, okay.
So this is a little tactic here. They can't actually take the pawn on b2, right? It looks like a free pawn, but it's actually a huge mistake to take it.
Right.
And meanwhile, they probably have to weaken their king to avoid it, which you could take material or just keep your really good bishop there. We suddenly have a very nice position. So
Okay.
queen h4 could be good. I chose queen e4.
Mm-hmm.
I figured, they can't disturb my queen here at all. I'm not trading queens. Let's see what they do. There was a little bit more thought process behind that, but it's not important right now.
Okay.
Now my opponent, he really, really, really wants to trade. And by the way, he started offering me draws around this time, which gave it away even more. He plays queen b4 and he says draw. And I say nothing. Now I'm in check. How should we get out of check here? What's the best way?
I see bishop d2, but also just pawn c3.
Are there any other options that make sense?
There's also knight d2, and also knight c3.
When you're in check, it's good to consider all legal moves because usually there's not that many of them.
Yeah.
But I think you've hit the important ones. Knight c3, maybe not so good because of knight takes c3. Bishop d2 and knight d2 are the really important ones. And pawn c3. Now, if we want to play as actively as possible, we should consider what they'd like to play. And also, what move just puts our pieces on the best squares. Since they really, really want to trade pieces, what do you think they're going to play next, no matter what we do?
Probably something that still puts his queen in line with my queen. And
Well, they're aligned right now. So let's say you
Yeah.
block with a pawn, just for example. How will they react? Their queen's under attack.
probably just queen takes e4 then.
Right. So how would we like to react to queen takes e4? Do we want to move our bishop again, or do we want to have another option?
Okay, so which piece did I block with again? Was it the pawn or the
We were
bishop?
using pawn as a hypothetical. We were saying, if we block with the pawn, they really want to trade queens.
Yeah.
And we would have to take back with the bishop. So that's probably not ideal, is what I was getting at, because you're using the same piece over and over again now. They're kind of getting what they want. They're reducing the pieces on the board, but in the process, you are not improving your position that much because your bishop's moving again and again. So it would be nice if we could answer queen takes e4 in a stronger way. So maybe not with c3.
Okay.
What other option do we have here?
So the knight from b1 could go to d2.
Okay, and now when they take on e4, what are we playing?
Knight takes back on e4.
Right, this is the most active continuation. Bishop d2 is not bad either, because even in this situation, you moved your bishop twice, but having a bishop on d2 is probably better than having a pawn on c3.
Right.
So you would still have the more active position. Here they have just a knight out. We have 3 minor pieces and the strong pawn on e5. So they're both good, but this is probably the most precise. My opponent traded, and now we have 3 minor pieces out in the open doing a lot of work. And we don't know yet where we want the bishop on c1, so we're actually flexible about what to do.
Okay.
He continued on his crusade to trade every piece imaginable with knight b4.
Okay.
Probably he should be getting his pieces out, but he's not. He's like, I'm going to trade everything, and it's going to be a draw. And so he offered me a draw again. I did not accept the draw. What move should white play here? Just active moves.
Very active?
It doesn't have to be very active, because we haven't finished our development yet,
Right.
and I don't think there's a grounds for an attack on their king, especially now that the queens have been exchanged.
In that case, I'd maybe either castle, or I might take the black bishop out, and so the knight's threatening a weird fork right now,
Um,
but
what are they
but
threatening?
like my bishop is in the way.
Oh, yeah, you're protecting C2, right?
Yeah.
Gotcha. So castling is what I played. I thought this was the most active move I could possibly play because it evacuates the center. I'm connecting my rooks. I could play like rook e1 and then go on the warpath very soon.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, they have only one piece out, which they quickly traded. So how do you evaluate this position in terms of these three factors? You know, we've got our king safety, our piece activity, our material.
Their king is looking pretty unsafe since there's nothing in front of it.
It could be, but we also can't attack them frontally yet. So maybe it's
not quite.
Maybe it's okay. I don't know. Let's see. How about the other aspects?
Piece activity basically doesn't exist because all that's actually moved is like a knight and a queen, which are both gone now.
Yeah, they have non-existent piece activity. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And material.
Material is even.
There's one difference.
Yeah, you have a more advanced pawn.
Yeah. In an even more higher level way of thinking about material, I like to consider which pawns are left on the board too. So we also have an E pawn against a C pawn. It's an interesting difference. Like, even though they're both pawns are very distinctive in that they usually keep their lane. So I like to think about the E pawn differently from the C pawn. So you might want to think about that yourself when you're playing some chess games. In this case, I think it's advantageous to have the E pawn because the E pawn restricts the D and F pawns because they could take on passant if they play D5 or F5. And it also supports white to occupy D6 and F6. Meanwhile, the C pawn, it's more like the C pawn is blocking the black pieces than helping anything. Also, the fact that we have a pawn on the D file instead of the C file means we could use the C file in the future for our rooks. So this difference is important. Winston is blocking everything.
Winston is blocking everything. He knows what time it is.
Come on, Winston. Okay, so when you're evaluating the position in terms of these factors, you can sometimes get an idea of like a summary evaluation of the position. Like white is better, black is better, white is winning, black is winning, it's equal, small advantage. So what do you think? Is it like a big advantage for white? We know white's better, but like, is it big or is it small? What's your intuition here?
I think it's considerable and it's growing.
Okay. If you had to convert it to material, how much material do you think white would be up? Like, what's the equivalent value?
Probably at least one piece, maybe two pieces.
I'd say this is probably worth about a minor piece, like maybe plus 3, which is interesting if you don't normally think in that way, because just where the pieces are is worth material somehow, and it really showed pretty soon. By the way, an interesting thing about this, so we say king safety, piece activity, material is the order, but material is like the most stable kind of material advantage, the most stable kind of advantage at all. If you are not able to convert your piece activity into an attack on the king, or if you're not able to convert your better safety into an attack on the king, then those advantages will disappear. They're more dynamic advantages, and material is static and more reliable. So this is probably why people are usually materialistic by instinct. Okay, so they played bishop e7. What should white play?
I'm not sure if I want to trade or by placing pressure on that bishop with my bishop on g5, or
which bishop do you think is better right now? Their bishop or your bishop? They're the same kind of bishop, but one is slightly better than the other.
Right. Probably mine, since more of their pawns are on white squares.
But isn't that good for that bishop because that bishop goes on dark?
Yeah, then it's good for them to take my bishop, is it?
Yeah, I think also that bishop is not badly placed. Like, it kind of wants to be there. You can sense that there's not really any other place for it. Meanwhile, we haven't even used our bishop. So I think you intuited the right move. You were thinking of bishop g5, right? Yeah, this is what I played. And I think this is a really important move. They cannot ignore it. If they castle, they lose the bishop for free. So they have to do something. And based on how they've played so far in this game, you can probably guess what they did.
They traded.
They traded it. And when they trade it, this allows us to improve our pieces at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I played this in-between move. By the way, in chess, for some reason, we have three words for this kind of move. We have in-between move, we have intermezzo, and we have Zwischenzug. I don't know why we need 3, but we do. So this Zwischenzug is very nice.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like a bone-crushing winning move, but having the knight on d6 means that they have no future. They cannot get out that bishop ever, and we're threatening knight takes f7. So I'll just show you kind of quickly the finale. They played f6 because they're going to lose it anyway. I decided to take this, and he was offering me a draw continuously throughout here. You can read some of my other notes in this game later on about like how weird this game was.
Sure.
So then he took on f6. I added in rook e1, and now it's just like game over. Knight f7, rook g8. I played knight h6, rook g6, knight f5, and he played rook takes g2 and resigned. I mean, it's kind of understandable because let's say that he had played something kind of normal here, like rook g7. What should white play?
I was looking at rook e8 for a couple of moves.
Yeah, this is checkmate in this position.
Okay.
So we should do it. Just bam, that's it.
So you were just playing with him at the end.
Not exactly, because here if he plays... So if I play rook e8 right now, it's winning material.
Yeah. But he can escape still.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
It's more complicated than I'd like. And my pieces are so good, like why should I go and win material now? I want to like try to checkmate him or something. Right. So I did this to try to insinuate that I'm going to play rook e8 and then take the rook for free. I don't actually want to take it with the knight. And I'm also just asking him a question. It's very practical. Like, do you want to lose the knight? Do you want to lose your bishop? What do you want to do? How do you want to lose the game?
How do you like it?
Yeah, how do you like it? Exactly. So he played rook g6. That's how he likes it. And I played knight f5 because this renews the mate threat. And now there's no way to even stop it, which is why he played rook takes g2, offered a draw, and resigned. And so that's how it goes. This was a good example for piece activity because black just relentlessly traded pieces, which means attacking is not really going to happen necessarily. Like, we're not going to checkmate them with the queen because they're trading them so rapidly. But every trade they make, the difference between white's development and black's development grows. And at a really high level, just a small difference between two pieces can be enough to win the game. Okay, now the last thing that I want to look at today is an example for material. In this game, I was playing black, and this is one of my recent games. I recently had an undefeated streak in the Southern Class tournament, and I took first place. And this is one of my games that I won in the penultimate round. I'll do a little bit of show and tell, not too many questions, but there are a couple critical moments that are important. So my opponent played c3, which is sort of an avoidant line. There's some opening theory here, but it's much less than if they had played, for example, d4. Here, pretty much let's go to right here. In this position, every legal move for white is good, pretty much. Like, you can play pretty much anything here, and it has its own independent theory of how it should be done. And then, after each of those moves, almost every one of black's moves is also theoretical and has independent value. So if you go here, you're kind of going into like a quagmire of opening theory. So people will sometimes avoid it by playing a move that's not as challenging like c3.
Sure.
It doesn't look very challenging. I mean, it's not. So I played like this, and they played bishop e2. Kind of a trap. What do you think would happen if black took on e4? Just a pop quiz.
It's starting to look like... I'm not sure if this is fried liver, but then I would be tempted as white to go for knight g5 and then maybe have like another bishop move into something else, but
I don't think the liver's that fried. Like, if I wanted to do that, I would have played bishop c4.
Yeah.
Not bishop e2. So here there's a different downside for knight takes e4. Different kind of trap.
Okay. Oh, then maybe just d3 and then.
I'll go back. I'll just play knight f6. And then I'm kind of happy that I stole a pawn without too much repercussion.
Sure.
I would be less active, but I'd have material, so it would kind of balance out somehow.
Okay. Well, if the bishop's there, then it probably wants to go in the other direction. So.
Start with the forcing moves. Don't worry about the abstract stuff too much when we're just looking for like a tactical moment.
Yeah.
It's hard to switch between like piece activity, material, king safety, and then also like I'm calculating for a win. But you have to do it. It's hard.
Okay. Well, there's also like the direct threat of queen a4.
Okay. Let's say I block with the bishop or something. What's your next move?
Oh, then the bishop that I just threw on e2 can go up to b5.
Do something more forcing. Bishop e5 is possible, but you have a more forcing move instead of that.
Many force.
Yes. Such force. Wow.
Oh, then I can just take the knight.
Yeah, right. So
right there.
As you do more puzzles and stuff, these kinds of things will become automatic. Like you see the knight, it's isolated, it's hanging, the move isn't that active, it's more materialistic.
Yeah, I've seen this one many times.
Yeah. So here's our one move double attack. And this is a thing to look out for in this opening. People do this constantly. So I played g6, allowing them to do whatever they want for a few moves, but I'm also about it, you know, just developing my pieces, no big deal. And then he did something kind of weird. He moved this bishop again with check. And this represents some loss of time because you could probably imagine a variation where white had played bishop b5 check in one move, not two moves, and then it would be like this position but a little bit faster. So this is a little odd. I blocked with the bishop, they traded, I brought out my knight into the game. I also could have taken with the queen, they're both fine. I chose knight. They played queen e2, finally not losing their pawn on e4. I played queen c7, not declaring which way I want to castle or anything, just, you know, putting my queen on a good square. Notice that they can't play knight c3 to d5 because their pawn is in the way. This would be normally this would be a good thing to do when the queen's on c7, but they can't do it.
So okay, so the fact that they chose c3 at the very beginning restricted their knight.
Right. It gives me more options. I might not want to put it on c7 if I see knight c3. So I like to have more options. Sometimes, you know, you can transform that into something tangible. It at least gives them more room to go wrong when you have more options than they don't. So they played d4, and again, I gave them some rope to hang themselves on by castling, so they can do whatever they want for one move. And they chose to do something very active. They played e5, which is attacking. But after pawn takes, black has a very active move themselves, and that move is knight g4. Now you can see that every piece in the world is looking at this e-pawn, and they have to deal with it somehow.
Yeah.
And things could easily go wrong here for white. They chose to play e6. And I again tried to play the most active possible move. I played knight e5.
Oh.
And I'm trying to think of how I should explain this interesting thing. Let's say that they play a move like bishop g5. This position is now black to play and win. Just to illustrate how black's pieces have kind of sprung to life. Suddenly there are checkmate threats.
Okay. Oh, okay. So is it knight takes knight on f3, and then
Maybe I'll take with a queen.
Does it really matter what happens next, and then queen takes g2 checkmate?
h2, but yeah, you're right, exactly. So we take, and that's it. Checkmate, good game. So they are really starting to be in difficult territory. For that reason, they took this knight. I took with my knight because my knight's hanging. I just want to save it. And this has prevented black from issuing those checkmate threats, but black's pieces remain much more active than white's pieces for the moment. Now they play bishop f4, and black has the opportunity to win the pawn on e6. They can just take it for free. So what's your decision? Should we take this pawn, or is that like too materialistic? Should we be focusing more on activity or king safety or something here?
I mean, if it does take, then you do have a double pawn near the king, but there is also a rook that controls... a rook that's gonna attack the hanging bishop.
Right. They'd probably fix that. You know, let's say we take on e6 and they play bishop g3. Pretty natural move. The bishop becomes a new defender of the king. It just kind of sits there with the king.
Yeah.
Do you still like that position for black? Sort of an opinion question, because it's not like there's a forced line here to examine. It's more like when you see all the resources available to you, are they good enough? Is it worth taking a pawn? You're spending one move, you're messing up your structure a little bit, but a pawn is a pawn.
Yeah, no, I don't know if I like that.
It's a nuanced question, and this is a question that was too difficult for my opponent to answer, which I was able to use to win the game. Because when you take this pawn, it's actually very useful, even though it's a doubled pawn. It's an extra pawn. These pawns are controlling these squares forever. This is a way that you can think about it. As long as you never lose that e6 pawn, the pawn is going to do really good work. It means that you can put pieces on d5 and f5 without really facing too much resistance. Same thing on d6 and f6. And we also get open files. We have the open d file, and we have the open f file. The main thing that I checked when I made this decision was that I can hold on to the pawn without becoming passive. It's good to grab material if you still remain active and have good king safety. So I believed that the balance was in my favor.
Okay.
They played bishop g3 because they don't want to lose the bishop. And it would be foolish to take on e5 because that would leave them very passive because they don't have their knight even developed in the game. So they need to keep that piece. I played rook f5, supporting the knight. This is called overprotection. It's not like the piece is overloaded. When I add this extra piece to defend the knight, it means I'm more flexible to move my queen. And the queen and the knight are pinned, so that's really important to do at this stage. They played knight d2, activating the knight, which looks dangerous. I calculated this all ahead of time when I decided to take on e6. Like, is the knight going to fly in here and then become a monster on e6? It would look like the knight in the last game I showed you when it lands on d6, if that could happen. Not as strong, but still very dangerous. So I just made sure that that wasn't going to happen by playing queen c6. And I'm prepared now to move my knight wherever it needs to. It's no longer pinned. And if they try something like this, I think I was planning to play h6. Just say no. You know, it's like the dare program all over again. I'm just not letting that knight come in. I don't want it.
Right.
And yeah, that's all she wrote for that line. So they played rook d1, trying to stay active. And I remember this being sort of a watershed moment in the game because I'm up a pawn. My pieces are pretty active, but I need to choose a plan. So what I chose to do is advance my pawns and take a lot of space and try to force them to exchange pieces, which is in contrast with the last game because I want to force them to exchange pieces in a way where my pieces stay active, not just exchanging for the sake of exchanging.
Right.
So I played b5, gaining more space. This also prevents any pieces of white from occupying c4, including the c4 pawn. They played f4, kicking the knight, and I played knight f7. I did mention that I want to trade pieces, but I don't want to trade pieces that badly. I don't want to play knight c4, sacking a pawn to do so. That'd be silly. So just going back here. I also had another very concrete reason that I put the knight here. They played knight f3, which is dangerous. You know, they have different places to put the knight that are pretty good. I prevented both of them with my bishop. They played rook e1, now putting pressure on e6. And this is where we can see the point of knight f7, as opposed to, say, knight d7. First, I added this move, saying if you want to trade pieces, I'm cool with it now. Because, like, if they do this, which piece should I take with, the pawn or the queen?
The queen?
If I take with the queen, there's a downside.
Okay.
They would take here.
Yeah.
So we take with the pawn. This is also the more intuitive move, because this means you're fixing your pawn structure. You see how we have this, like, bulwark of pawns now?
Okay. Yeah.
So this makes a lot of sense in several ways. So rook takes d5 would be a serious error. So they played rook c1. And so after this in-between move, rook d5, now we can see why the knight went to f7. I played knight d8. Now this might look kind of silly, because the knight is on the back rank. It's not active, but it is supporting my big asset, the e6 pawn. And it's good to have big assets. So even though that knight isn't doing great, all of the other black pieces are. And meanwhile, white's pieces are kind of struggling to have meaning. So this is all according to plan. It's okay to have one passive piece if it defends something really important, like your king, or in this case, the only weakness, which is the e-pawn. So they played c4 to try to create some new targets, like the c-pawn. I traded. Now my c-pawn is all by itself, Mr. Lonely, but that's okay. Played rook b8, just activating that one. They played b3, avoiding losing the pawn because it was under attack twice. And what do you think black should do here? Try to activate their pieces.
Is it fine now to take the pawn on b3?
Well, it's protected by another pawn, so I wouldn't.
Oh yeah, no. Okay. I'm tempted to go rook e5 just to attack the queen, but I know there's also a knight that can take from there.
Yeah, so that'll be an active move, but only for half a move. So don't do that.
Yeah.
You're kind of on the right track. Like, we should do something active, but not something crazy.
Yeah.
Another thing we're going to talk about is a thinking technique that can help you to make decisions, not based on the evaluation, where you ask yourself, what's my worst placed piece? What's my opponent's idea? What are the tactical targets? So here, what do you think is your worst placed piece besides the knight? The knight is doing an important job. We're going to leave it alone.
Right. So probably the rook on b8.
Right. And here's another sort of parallel question. This is not one of the fundamental questions, in my opinion, but what is your opponent's most useful piece at the moment? Or maybe the most annoying one. It's not that bishop on g3.
Yeah, I feel like it's either the queen or the rook that's on c4.
Let's focus on that rook. So if our worst placed piece is the rook on b8, and the rook on c4 is really good, what are we going to try to do?
Offer a trade.
With what move?
Rook b4.
Yeah, exactly. So this is what I did. You can see how the extra pawn is useful here. It prevents f5. It supports the rook on d5, which means that they don't have a really good way of avoiding this exchange.
Okay.
They played bishop f2, and I decided not to take right away, but you know, it's in the cards.
Yeah.
They played rook ec1, which I consider a concession because they are not pressuring e6 as much anymore, so now I decided to take.
Yeah.
They took with their rook. And now that one pair of rooks is gone from the board, I did something. We're going to talk about this more in a couple weeks. I took full control of this open file. So this is something that has to do with the pawn structure. This is how we can activate the pieces, taking advantage of that feature of the pawn structure. Because they no longer have two rooks to protect the back rank, this is kind of a successful invasion. They played g3 first. I played knight c6. Not rushing, just trying to improve my pieces. They played rook e4 to try to maintain that pressure on e6. How do you think we should answer the threat of rook takes e6? We want to stay active, but we don't want to lose our extra material.
So the first thing I would want to do is move the queen out of the way, but I'm
But
not sure what direction to
that's
put
like
her in.
saying I'm giving up my pawn, though, right? You're like, e6 is dead to me. I don't care anymore.
Oh, okay, yeah. So would you just move it forward one?
Is that a safe square?
No, because it's being attacked by the pawn on f4 and also the knight on f3.
So if we go here on e5, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 attackers.
Yeah.
And using another color, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 defenders. So the way that would probably shake out is I go here, they take, we take, they take, we take, they take, we take. Hey, wait, that means we win material, right?
Yeah,
So
I
that
guess
means
so.
that means it's safe. And that's
Okay.
because we have an even number of attackers and defenders.
Right. And if you attack first, then you're the one who wins. When there's an equal number of attackers and defenders,
Yeah.
right? Okay.
So we could play e5, but this also changes the pawn structure in a way that might not necessarily be favorable, because if we consider which pieces are better here, like with the piece activity argument, I don't think the knight on f3 is great, and then they get to trade it off for your knight on c6.
Right.
So as long as they don't like make an additional move and lose material, exchanging like one pair of pieces is probably fine for white. Like, so they might play like takes, and then you take, and then they take, and you take, and they might just stop here and be like, okay, that's enough taking for me. I'm gonna try to use the new open file, or the fact that the rook on d5 isn't stable anymore. Like, for example, they might play queen c4, saying like, aha, now that your e-pawn is gone, I'm going to pin your rook. Something like that. This is all a little bit hand-wavy, where we're like, maybe that's not good, I don't know. So you could do that if you wanted to, but I thought king f7 was a simple solution. You don't have to think about any complications. The king is a piece too, so we can just use it to defend f7. No big deal. And this also asks a difficult question to white with really no extra effort. We haven't created any new weakness. We've just slightly improved our king's position, because if we trade everything, we do want to be closer to the center. And yeah, so they had to just kind of keep maneuvering while black is improving the pieces. Now, if black was not up material, all these exchanges might be for nothing. But since they are up a pawn, there is sort of this looming sort of Damocles situation where white doesn't really want to trade anything because of that extra pawn, but they're also facing no choice. My opponent resisted as best they could, but after knight takes, king takes, another pair of pieces is off the board, and their king is in a sort of weird spot now. So what would you play here for black to try to take advantage of that?
The most immediate threat I can see is rook d3 check.
Okay. I think you could play this more or less without thinking too hard. You know, we throw this check, they have to deal with it. Let's say they play rook e3, offering a trade. What would your next move be?
My first instinct now is to just decline the trade because I'm in such a good position.
You could do that. Yeah. I don't know if there's like a firm answer for what to do in this position. I think you have a few nice options, like maybe queen c6, and then you could like trade and be like, hey, I have an extra pawn. For example, maybe you go here, they do this, and then we could take and take, of course, what else, and then take and then take, and then play this endgame. Maybe. I think in this case our c pawn is weak, so maybe this is not a good sequence. But we could maybe take this one and then decide later what we want to do. Like, we could go here and say that's a double attack, I'm going to win the a pawn. This could be a more feasible line to play for an advantage, try to win more material. This looks pretty reasonable.
Okay.
So that's one line. You could decline. You just say, hey, my rook is really well placed now, and you got to deal with it for the rest of time. And they're going to just sweat and struggle. Like queen c6 is still on the horizon, for example, or maybe queen d5. You can play queen d5 now. You know, we got options. Lots of good things to do. Matter of taste, I think. So I played rook d3. They played bishop e3. But now bishop e3 was a serious error, and we can put the rook on c3. The reason this is so bad is that they have to move the queen, and there is such a thing as a wrong answer here because queen d1 is coming up, and the black pieces are invading. They played queen e2, but then queen d5 is pinning the rook. These problems probably wouldn't exist if they didn't have to constantly avoid trading to deal with the extra pawn. So now they're getting different kinds of trouble, like the junction of not wanting to trade but also being obligated to, creating weaknesses. So I started pinning everything. They played queen d2, and it's time to win material. So black to play and win.
Rook takes e3.
Okay, what happens next?
Well, then queen takes e3 back. And then okay, there's no. Is there?
You're close.
Okay.
Keep looking at it. You play rook takes e3, queen takes e3, and then what?
Winston says, "Wah."
That's how he helps.
Yeah. Should I go queen h5 check?
So we're sacking a rook and then playing queen h5?
I guess.
I feel like they don't go together very well.
Yeah.
Well, why are you playing rook takes e3? What's the point of it?
To remove material from the board to get closer to checkmate.
So how do you remove more material from the board after queen e3?
Yeah, okay. So bishop takes queen on e3.
Yeah, exactly. So they can't take with the rook because it's pinned.
Yeah.
They take back, and we just win the queen. And now we're playing queen against rook. And queen's a strong boy, so they can't deal.
Yeah.
Notice here how the extra pawn, it did factor in two ways. One, it's not on the f-file, so we were able to use the f-file to put pressure. It also supported us to keep pieces on d5. Here the queen's even on d5 at the end of the game. And there's also this hidden effect where they need to avoid certain kinds of strategies because they're down material. They have to try to keep it complicated. So these are some examples of how the evaluation of the position factors into your decision making. I'll show you the next couple of moves. I did a little hunting over here. Not necessarily the best moves, but it doesn't matter in positions like this.
Yeah.
I let them take that pawn because there's a tactic here, c4. And our last little pop quiz. What happens if they take the pawn on c4? It's tactics time. Forcing moves first. Yes, of course. What else?
So if they take that, then
What would the targets be?
obviously that. So then is the queen safe to go on d4, and then there's just this nice diagonal where it's both attacking the rook and the king?
Yeah, that's right. So this is why they actually can't take the pawn. They played rook c7 to try to deal with it. And here I played a move and they resigned right away. What do you think I played?
Ooh.
It's not a double attack or anything, but it has something to do with like their rook is hanging, their king is in the open. This combination of factors. Strong pawn on c4.
So I have a couple of options. I can just take the pawn on b3. I can attack either the rook or the king. But I'm not sure which one is most forcing. Probably checking somehow.
Checking somehow.
Yeah. So queen c2 check?
Queen c2 is probably a good move, but there's something else here.
Okay.
I somehow managed to freeze our Discord in the recording. I'm silly. I don't know how I did that.
Okay.
Foolishness. Woe is me.
Uh,
I don't know what I've done. Anyway, so what do you think Black would like to do? Like, what's their dream kind of move? Something that would easily win if they could play it.
assuming like a world where rules make no sense, then it would probably be like queen c2, but there's no pawn in the way, and it's also still my turn.
There's another move it's kind of similar to that, but
Okay.
you have to follow another train of logic. So why would I play c4 if it wasn't just for a cheap shot to win the rook? Is there another reason that move would be good?
Mm. Oh, I can just go past the pawn and go to c3.
Right, and what if the rook takes it?
Don't care, I can double attack with queen d2.
Right, so this is what I played, and they resigned because I'm going to have two queens.
Yeah.
They really just can't take it. I mean, they
Yeah.
can, but it's depressing. So I hope these were good examples for you to get used to the idea of evaluating these three factors that are important to make decisions during your chess game.
Mhm.
I picked them because they're kind of like extreme examples, but also realistic ones. And in practice, you're going to have to weigh these three factors all the time. Just remember, king safety is the most important. Piece activity is second most important. And material, I mean, it's there to be sacrificed pretty much. So, but you do need it sometimes, and it can exert an influence when your extra material is well placed. Alrighty. If you have any questions, you can always ask me later on.
Okay.
Alrighty. So, good session. I'll stop the recording here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.